Hello friends, welcome to the MedicoZap Masterclass and myself Dr. Gunjan. And today, as you can see, our topic of discussion is fertilization. Now, once the mature sperm and a mature ova is formed, the next step in human reproduction is fertilization. So now we'll discuss what are the steps in fertilization. First of all, when the sperm enters the female reproductive tract, these sperms are not capable of fertilizing the ova. So the process which makes these sperms capable of fertilizing the ova is called capacitation. And where does it occur? It occurs in the female reproductive tract. Begins in the cervix and the major part takes place in the fallopian tubes. So majorly capacitation occurs in the fallopian tubes. Now this is a physiochemical process. Cyclic AMP dependent phosphorylation occurs and these sperms, they become alkaline. There is efflux of the hydrogen ions and the calcium ions come in. And now this process makes the sperm hypermotile. Remember the word hypermotile because this occurs in the female reproductive tract. Whereas the sperm gain their motility in the caudal end of the epididymis. Now these sperms take only 30 minutes to travel from the cervix to the fallopian tubes. But the entire process of capacitation takes 7 hours. Again, these two are very important questions. Now, once the sperms have become capable of fertilizing the ova, they go and attach to the zona pellucida of the secondary oocyte. This causes the release of hydrolytic enzymes like hyaluronidase, acrosin from the acrosome of the sperm, and these enzymes, they cause lysis of the zona pellucida, allowing the entry of the sperm into the secondary oocyte. And this entire process is called acrosomal reaction. Again, the ions responsible for this is calcium ion. Remember, in sperms, if any question you asked about ions involved, the answer will always be the calcium ions. Now, this binding of the sperms to the zona pellucida and the acrosomal reaction, all this is mediated by the sperm receptors present on the zona pellucida, which are also called zona proteins, named ZP1, ZP2 and ZP3. And among these, ZP3 is the main receptor mediating the acrosomal reaction. Now, I am always talking of the secondary oocyte here because remember, this is the stage in which the ovulation occurs. Now, here I give you a brief idea about the structure of the secondary oocyte. If this is the nucleus, this is the vitelline membrane. The inner cell membrane is the vitelline membrane. Then there is a mucoprotein layer and that is called zona pellucida. And the outer cells, they are arranged loosely and this layer is called corona radiata. Now once the sperms have entered the secondary oocyte, it causes the release of cortical enzymes from the secondary oocyte and this is called cortical reaction. And the receptor involved is ZP2. Now remember, the main receptor involved in acrosomal reaction is ZP3 and the main receptor involved in cortical reaction is ZP2. Now, the release of the enzymes from the cortex of the secondary oocyte, it causes hardening of the zona pellucida and this is called zona reaction. And it is because of this hardening that the zona becomes impermeable to the other sperms and thus it prevents polyspermy. And this entire process can be seen beautifully depicted in this diagram. Here we can see a mature sperm with a nucleus, a middle piece and a tail and an acrosomal gap. And this diagram depicts the cell membranes of the oocyte, namely the egg cell membrane or the vitelline membrane, the mucoprotein layer that is the zona pellucida and the outer layer that is cumulus layer or you can say corona radiata. Now this sperm crosses the corona radiata and attaches itself to the zona pellucida. It causes the release of enzymes from the acrosome of the sperm and this is acrosomal reaction. This causes lysis of the zona pellucida and thus allowing the entry of sperm into the secondary oocyte, and then occurs the fusion of the sperm and the egg. Now, the actual process of fertilization occurs, and there is fusion of the male and the female pronucleus to form the zygote. And remember, this fertilization causes the resumption of the meiosis II that was suspended in the secondary oocyte, and this causes the release of second polar body. Now, where does this fertilization occurs? It is in the ampulla of the fallopian tube, and the factor responsible for this fusion of the male and female pronucleus is fertilin present on the sperm. Now, once the zygote is formed, mitotic division starts in it, and after 20 to 30 hours, it leads to the formation of two blastomeres. So, it takes 20 to 30 hours for the formation of two cell stage or two blastomeres, and this is again one question. After this, it follows a binary type of division, and from 2 cell it becomes 4 cell stage, 8 cell stage, 16 cell stage, and this 16 cell stage has a special name, and that is called morula, because it resembles a mulberry. Until this stage, the total cell mass is not increased, and thus the zona pellucida, I told you, it remains intact. And this entire process is occurring in the fallopian tubes. So, where does the zygote get its nutrition from? It is from the secretory cells of the fallopian tubes, and in the form of pyruvate. And this cell division has been beautifully depicted in this diagram. Here we have the zygote, the 2 cell stage, the 4 cell stage, the 8 cell stage, and the 16 cell stage, which is called morula. And then it leads to the formation of blastocyst. Now, all this while, when the division is occurring, the formed zygote is also travelling from the ampulla of the fallopian tube towards the uterus. So, when does this zygote enters the uterus? It is on the 4th day of fertilization. That is, after travelling for 3 days in the fallopian tubes, the morula enters the uterine cavity on 4th day of fertilization. And the same thing has been depicted in this diagram. You can see the cell division continuing as well as the movement of the zygote towards the uterus. Now, here one more thing. At an average, we consider the female menstrual cycle to be of 28 days, and in this we consider ovulation as well as fertilization to occur on the 14th day. So, you might get questions many a times. Instead of this, how many days after fertilization, you might get a question that on what day of the cycle this event happens. So, you will always have to add plus 14. So, if you are asked on what day of the menstrual cycle does it enter the uterine cavity, it will be 4 plus 14, that is on 18th day of the cycle it enters the uterine cavity. Now, what helps in the movement of the zygote towards the uterine cavity? And that is because of the movement of the cilia present in the fallopian tube as well as the peristalsis of the fallopian tubes, and among this the peristalsis is the major factor. Now, here we have a clinical implication of this, that in case of pelvic inflammatory disease either due to tuberculosis or any other infection, when the cilia are damaged, then the movement of the zygote is hampered, and thus it leads to ectopic pregnancy. That is, the zygote gets implanted in the fallopian tube itself. Now, the second implication, that when a lactational female is taking progesterone only pills for contraception, the progesterone in these pills, they have a relaxation effect. So, they inhibit the peristalsis of this fallopian tube and so risk of ectopic pregnancy. So, it is in the morula stage or in the 16th cell stage that the zygote is entering the uterine cavity on 4th day of after fertilization or 18th day of the menstrual cycle. Now, on 4th and 5th day, the cell division continues and it reaches a 64 cell stage. Here, the morula is covered by a film of mucus. Fluid passes through the thin canaliculi of the zona pellucida, now which separates the cells of the morula, and it is then called blastocyst. Cyst because it is fluid filled cavity now, so it leads to the formation of blastocyst. Now, the lysis of the zona occurs due to blastocyst enlargement and the escape of the embryo, and this is called zona hatching. So, this occurs on the 5th day. You might have a question that zona hatching occurs on which day, and this is the 5th day. Blastocyst forms on 5th day, zona hatching occurs on 5th day. Now if we sum up the sequence of events that are occurring in fertilization. So first, capacitation occurs. The sperms become now capable of fertilizing the ova. They go and attach to the zona pellucida, and it causes the release of enzymes from the acrosome of the sperm, which is called acrosomal reaction. Now it causes the lysis of the zona pellucida, and the sperm is now able to enter the cortex of the secondary oocyte, which causes the release of enzymes from the cortex, and this is called cortical reaction. Now these enzymes, they cause hardening of the zona, which makes the zona impermeable to other sperms, and this is called zona reaction. So this completes our sequence of events of fertilization. Now I'll give you a brief idea about the blastocyst. Now as I told you that the morula, when enters the uterine cavity, here it is covered by a film of mucus. Fluid passes through the canaliculi of the zona pellucida and enters the morula, separating its cells, leading to the formation of blastocyst. Cyst because when fluid enters, it becomes a cyst. Now the cells of the blastocyst differentiate into inner cell mass and the peripherally arranged cells, which is called trophoblast or trophoectoderm, one and the same thing. Now it is this blastocyst which gets implanted. So we'll continue with blastocyst